And welcome back. As we go ahead and look a little bit more at our Boolean expressions, today we want to, of course, touch on the topic of precedence and associativity rules. First thing, of course, is precedence, and that means just what is the order of how these things are going to be handled. And we have, of course, already built several Boolean expressions and evaluated them to be true or false, and we've done this both with simple and with compound expressions using and or. And if just as a recall, Java, if you remember, follows the basic order of operations. We have, for example, multiplication division is higher precedence than that of addition and subtraction. Additionally, we can use parentheses to tell Java that precedence order. So if we want to specify, hey, do this thing first, we use parentheses to make sure we tell Java that is going to take first. However, if we have two operations that have the same precedence, then Java will use associativity to determine which operation to do first. So for example, if we had, let's say, two addition operations, those are the same level, so it's going to have to use associativity to evaluate which one to evaluate first. If we look at our precedence order, the order of how these things work is it's always going to do things like parentheses or brackets first, then it'll use your incrementer or decrementer operations, so plus plus or minus minus. Then it moves on to multiplication, division, or the modulus operator. Addition and subtraction come after that. And then you notice we get into our Boolean operator. So this is where we start saying, okay, which one of these things is going to be evaluated? So we have less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. We have the equals to equals or not equals, and those are slightly lower than the inequality ones. So it's always, inequality is always going to take a slightly higher precedence than of equality. Then, of course, we have and or, which are their other operations. Now, these, of course, you see here, they're a little bit different, though realistically, when we start writing our code, you can effectively treat these at the same level and these as the same level because of how Java is going to evaluate them. However, if you had to put them on the same level and say, hey, evaluate two things at once, Java is going to, of course, always move from inequality to equality and then either an and to an or. But for most purposes, you can effectively think as these two being on the same level. Now, notice we just talked about levels. So that means we have higher precedence that we might have to deal with. Java, when it works an expression, it doesn't just go from left to right, but it goes left to right based upon the higher precedence to lower precedence. So, for example, we have the expression balance times rate plus bonus. This is the same thing as saying parentheses balance times rate plus bonus, because what we're effectively doing is we're parenthesizing, saying, hey, do balance times rate first. Or another way you can think about this is that you're effectively parenthesizing the whole expression, balance times rate plus bonus, and that would then say you're doing that whole expression. All right, but most commonly we'll probably just write out this way because, again, we know that multiplication has a higher precedence. Now, with Java's rules for evaluation, the one thing you have to keep in mind is for it does what's known as a binding. So it's associating those operands with the operator. So whether that's multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, etc. So what it does is it fully parenthesizes the expression using precedence and associativity rules. Then it's going to evaluate left to right. And if an operator is waiting for its 2 or 3 operands to be evaluated, then the operator is evaluated as soon as its operands have been completed. Now, I already mentioned this term binding. All right, that, of course, again, remember, is the associate operands with the operators. All right, so you're putting these two things together. You're binding an expression together, whether it's the numerical values with the like addition, subtraction, multiplication, whatever it is, or maybe you're having a string variable and you're associating it that way. However, the best thing to do if you ever start getting confused is to include parentheses except for the meaning is obvious. So, for example, I said rate times time plus lead. I could write that, or I could write parentheses rate times time plus lead. Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, you know probably multiplication is going to be evaluated first, so we can omit parentheses for that expression. Now, we're over here in Eclipse, and one thing you'll see is I have created a parenthesized expression here, and we are evaluating these 3 variables. So we have if num1 plus num3 is equal to num2, num1 times num2 is less than num3. And if we run this, of course, we do see it says evaluation complete. But let's just take a moment to actually break down this expression into how it kind of works through it, in case if you're wondering how the precedence work. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this a little bit. And this is, of course, our original expression right up here. So what Java is going to do when it looks at this and say, I want to work with this. So it's going to work left to right. Now it looks first to see where do I have parentheses inside of it. Because these, of course, are the outermost parentheses. So then it works to the next set of parentheses, which is this set right here. And so then when it's inside here, what's the next thing it's going to evaluate? Well, the next thing it's going to evaluate is this num1 plus num3. Because remember, the regular operators, addition, subtraction, multiplication, are going to have a higher precedence than that of an equals operator. So it's going to effectively parenthesize this expression and evaluate this part first. Then, once it's done that, what's the next thing it's going to evaluate? Well, the next thing it's going to evaluate is this equals part. So it's going to evaluate equals num2. So it's going to go ahead and evaluate that part. So that's the part that we, of course, have had previously. So cool, we have that evaluated. Now, what's it going to do next? Well, it's not going to actually get to the OR next. Now it's going to look to see, what do I need to evaluate on this side, right? Because it's going to look and say, oh, I have another expression over here. Because remember, multiplication is higher than an OR, and this inequality is higher. So when it does this, again, it's going to try to first evaluate the multiplication. So it's effectively, again, doing this part first. And then what it's going to do is it's going to now see, oh, I have this inequality I need to evaluate. So it's going to go ahead and evaluate that whole part. Now, what it should do last is our OR, because that's all that's left, because it should have this part of our expression evaluated, and it should have this part of our expression now evaluated. So now, of course, it can evaluate this, and if I run my program, of course, I get the same exact value as what I should be expecting, because that's what I'm expecting is for evaluation complete, because all I did is I just simply added parentheses here for what Java is normally doing. It's going through and evaluating this. This is simply just more of a complete evaluation of how it is parenthesizing things using precedence and associativity rules. And again, you don't necessarily need to do this all the time. So for example, the very first example that I did, so if I just take these out of here real quick, this example works perfectly fine. In fact, if I were to even take this set of parentheses out here, let's just go ahead and take the set of parentheses out, and I go ahead and rerun my code, you'll see it still works exactly the same. But the reason why I added parentheses here, because sometimes it is nicer to put parentheses in place to help clarify your code. And even though it works fine here, adding parentheses here, for example, even around these pieces, because it's around the OR, can be a great way for you to help look at your code visually and see, how is this code being evaluated so I, the programmer, can understand and make sure it is functioning the way that I intend.